My name is Ms. Hayes, and I'm a fourth grade teacher at Moreland Heights Elementary School. The handout that accompanies this video can be found on the KCS website under Student Resources tab. This is in Week 5 activity packet. Today's activity is the fourth grade science. If you need a printed copy of this activity, they are going to be giving them out during the meal distribution sites each Wednesday between 10 a.m. and noon. Our essential question for today's lesson is what is needed for an ecosystem to survive? If you find that this video is hard to understand, turn on closed captions if they're available. Adjust the playback speed to slow down the video. Consider watching short clips, then pause, listen, and watch again. Or ask someone in your home to watch the video with you. Stop frequently and talk to your partner about what you heard and understood. So let's get started. As we begin to look at what is needed for an ecosystem to survive, we must first consider what makes up an ecosystem. This is a picture of an emerald ash borer. What do you think is happening in this photo? What did you wonder about the relationship between the tree and the emerald ash borer? Have you seen something like this before? Pause the video to think about these questions. You reviewed several terms in the previous week's lesson. We're going to quickly review them here today as they will be important in our application at the end of this instruction. We will review sunlight, herbivore, carnivore, decomposer, and food chain. So first we see sunlight. And sunlight in this picture is providing energy for these jungle leaves. Photosynthesis, we know, is the process of putting together carbon dioxide and water using energy from light. The chlorophyll absorbs energy from the sunlight inside of the chloroplast, the part of the plant where photosynthesis takes place. A herbivore, seen here, is an animal that consumes or gains its energy by eating plants. This koala is gaining its energy by eating the eucalyptus plant. Another example of a herbivore would be a zebra. As shown in this picture, zebras gain energy by eating grass. A carnivore, on the other hand, is an animal such as a dog, fox, crocodile, or shark that feeds primarily or exclusively on animal matter. Notice the tiger's teeth. They need this type of teeth in order to eat the meat. Another example of a carnivore is a wolf. Here, this carnivore appears to be hunting for his next meal. A decomposer, though, is an organism that breaks down waste and the remains of other organisms into simpler substances. According to NatureWorks, mushrooms and other decomposers do not have chlorophyll, so they cannot make their own food or energy. Instead, they have enzymes that are released to decompose or break down dead plants and animals. Food chain is the path that energy takes from one organism to another in the form of food. This diagram shows that the arrow goes from the sun to the grass. So the sun is giving the grass its energy. Then the energy goes from the grass to the rabbit. So the grass is giving the rabbit energy. So the rabbit would be considered higher on the food chain than the grass. And then finally, you have the coyote that eats the rabbit. So the rabbit gives energy to the coyote. And in this instance, A coyote would be considered the highest on the food chain. So pause to reflect and consider these questions. Number 1, which part of this food chain is a carnivore? If you guessed coyote, you are correct. It is the highest on this food chain, and it is a carnivore because it eats meat. It eats the rabbit to gain its energy. Number 2, which part of this food chain is a herbivore? If you guessed the rabbit, you guessed right. The rabbit is a herbivore because it eats the grass. It gets its energy from the grass. Number 3, what is the ultimate source of energy for a food chain? If you're looking at the diagram in this food chain, it is the sun. The sun gives energy to the entire food chain. We'll be highlighting a few terms today. Most likely, you've covered these in depth with your teacher this year. The words we'll be highlighting in the next section are producer, consumer, competition, and invasive species. So producer is an organism such as a plant that makes its own food. As discussed before, producers make or produce their own food through a process called photosynthesis. One of the essential ingredients in this process is the sunlight. Consumer, though, is an organism that cannot make its own food. In these examples, the lion or the carnivore is getting its energy from meat that it's eating. The red panda, pictured on the right, is a herbivore, which gets its energy from the plants. According to your textbook, competition is the struggle among living things for water, food, or other resources. Oftentimes in ecosystems, it's the competition between the same level on the food chain for needed resources. So for example, a rabbit and a deer might both compete for plants for energy. They are both herbivores who need plants to survive. So in this picture, baby birds are competing for food brought to them by their parents. This image is meant to symbolize competition that is an everyday challenge for animals in an ecosystem in order to survive. According to Nature Education Knowledge Project, redwood ants compete from opposing rival colonies to fight over territory. With territory gained, for most animals, comes the resources that the space has, such as water and food. So there are several ways that producers and consumers interact in an ecosystem. One type of relationship that we'll highlight in today's lesson is the impact that an invasive species can have on an ecosystem. An invasive species is a specific classification of a plant or animal that's not native to that ecosystem. Because it is not native to the ecosystem, the native plants and animals are not used to that non-native plant or animal, and therefore they don't bother it normally. Nonetheless, the invasive species, either plant or animal, still needs to survive, so it competes for both shelter, space, and energy, sunlight, plants, and or other animals. Because there is little to no predators for invasive species, it continues to multiply and grow rapidly. It uses resources like shelter and energy that the native or already existing plants and animals need to survive. Invasive species have a negative impact on the already existing ecosystem. According to page 36 of your science textbook, the example shown on this slide is a gypsy moth. It feeds on the leaves of both oak and aspen trees. With a higher number of caterpillars, the leaves of an entire forest can be damaged. An example of a regional invasive species is kudzu, shown here on the house. Oftentimes, you will see this plant growing and overtaking full cliffsides, often seen next to our highways. According to the Tennessee government website, kudzu was introduced from Japan as a way to help with soil erosion. However, this plant now is harmful to many native plants trying to survive. This plant can grow as fast as a foot in a day, and it's hard to control and manage. So, now we're going to apply all that we've learned in order to play a card game. You're going to need the page in your packet that looks like this one here on the screen. Step 1. Cut out each one of the boxes. It will look like the picture shown on the screen. Pause while you do this step. Step 2. Prepare the cards to play the game. You can tape the boxes, the paper boxes, onto regular playing cards with adult permission, or to cardstock or construction paper if you choose. If you don't want to tape them to different cards, the regular squares are going to work just fine. As an extension, you could use the dinosaur cards that you used with last week's lesson, if they're still available, as additional cards to this game. If not, the playing cards that we have in this week's packet will work just fine. Pause while you do this step. So step 3, divide cards equally between players. If you're unable to find a partner to play the game with you, divide the cards into 2 equal stacks. If you're just playing with the cards on this week's page, each player should get 12 cards. Pause while you do this step. Step 4, turn your stack of cards over and flip over the top card. Step 5, decide which card is higher on the food chain. For example, if one player, player A, flipped over a herbivore card, and the other player, player B, flipped over a carnivore card, the player who flipped over the carnivore card would take both the carnivore card and the herbivore card and put them into their discard pile. We see that a carnivore is higher on the food chain than a herbivore, and that's listed to the list to your right. We see that the most powerful card in this game is an invasive species, and they're listed first. So step 6, repeat until one person is out of cards, not counting the discard pile. Did your ecosystem survive? So you're going to look at all of the cards in your discard pile to see if you have at least 1 sunlight, 3 producers, 2 herbivores, 1 carnivore, 1 decomposer, but no invasive species. You can have more than this, but having at least this criteria would ensure that your ecosystem survived. So let's look at some tips for this card game. If both players flip over the same card, each player should count the next 3 cards and flip over the 4th card. The tie in the game, it would be considered competition between species for the same resource. The 4th card flipped over for each player will then be used to see who's highest on the food chain. The player with the highest card will then earn all the cards used in that round. If a player And so in this instance, or this example, the herbivores cards were placed by both player A and player B. And so then they counted out their 3 cards, and player B laid down producer, and player A laid down herbivore. So player A would get both the herbivore cards, the 3 cards that were counted out for both players, and the second herbivore card and the producer card. So they really won out. That second herbivore really won. So next, if one player runs out of cards, that means that your ecosystem didn't survive. If you run out of even the cards in your discard pile, so you have no cards, your ecosystem did not survive. Secondly, after deciding if your ecosystem survived, you can either continue to play another round with your cards, or you can redeal the cards and start again. So after you're finished playing the game, consider these reflection questions. Why would the invasive species cause someone to lose the card game? Why is it important to have more producers than carnivores for an ecosystem to survive? And what else impacts a survival of an ecosystem that's not shown in this game? Pause the video and tell a family member if they are available. At the beginning of the lesson, we considered ways that an emerald ash borer interacts with its non-native ecosystem. As you consider our lesson today, think about ecosystems of the Great Smoky Mountains that are near us. What is needed to ensure that that ecosystem continues to survive for generations to come? Don't forget to clean up and wash your hands. Remember, all materials for this video are found on the KCS website or during meal distribution on Wednesdays from 10 until noon. Thank you so much for joining me for today's lesson. I know that your teacher is so proud of you for taking time today to continue to learn. Your teacher misses you and hopes you're doing well. Have a great day.